Hi there, you're listening to Unnatural Selection, the show about newsy type stuff and things. My name is George.
My name is Tom.
And my name is Adam.
And with our powers combined, we are Lizzie McGuire. Make sure... we are Unnatural Selection. Make sure you visit us at our salubrious home on the web, unnaturalshow.com.
That is a joke that no one's going to understand because we were talking about it before we went live, George.
Worth
so
it.
You've got to
See, super worth it.
The more you explain it, Adam, the less mystery there is around it.
We'll just leave it there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally leave it there.
How are we going, guys? How is stage 4 treating you?
I mean...
yeah, it's treating me. It's treating me somehow.
Sirens going past me, so obviously everything's fine.
Just evidence of the world burning.
Yeah, I was wondering whose feed the siren was coming out of.
All Hotham Street is. It's just one constant siren of despair in Melbourne. So
we're slowly narrowing in on Adam's location episode by episode.
What's your apartment number again?
Fuck you. How about that?
Fuck you.
That happened once on the show, didn't it? Wasn't Adam talking about where he'd moved once, and he was talking about how
got very specific.
You guys liked to mispronounce the suburb you lived in a certain way, and you named the way that you mispronounced the suburb and all that sort of stuff. And then you're like, oh, we thought about doing it like in this kind of way, like a play on words with the street. And then George was like, what house number are you? And you were like, and you just said like 47. He was like, okay, so if you want Adam's address, like just got it out of you.
For very keen listeners, you too can figure out where Adam used to live.
Yeah, where he lived years ago.
It was good. I miss Carnegie. Had great food. Best cheesecake in town.
Okay, super relevant for our international listeners. You'll notice we are recording today on August the 9th, or as I like to refer to it, March 154th.
Seasons are irrelevant now.
Yep.
Like, what is time? Time is construct. You know, you make your own time now. Like, whatever. But there wasn't a joke there. It was just facts.
Yeah.
I realize it's actually March 161st. 161st.
161th.
Yeah,
it's shocking sort of to consider how many days it's been. It doesn't it's weird because it feels like a long time. Like, obviously this has been going on forever. But at the same time, when you say 161 days, I'm like, doesn't feel like 161 days. Like that still feels like a lot. It's the same as I feel like winter is just pissed by, but also I feel like I've been trapped in the house forever.
It's this really
winter,
weird,
to
be clear.
Yeah, but we are nearly 10 days into the last month of winter, even though this is Melbourne and winter likes to hang around for fucking ever, and so does summer into the whatever. But the point is, we're nearly into spring, and I feel like we would only just entering winter. But also at the same time, I feel like I've been trapped forever.
It does feel like sort of
I really want to get out
Mobius.
there and make use of those, those snowfields that are just going untapped.
No, they're not going untapped. Well, depending where you are in the country. I've been seeing heaps of pictures of people being like, just at the snow because we're not in stage 4. So much fun.
So good to be alive. How good is it not to live in Victoria?
So good.
It does seem like time is a bit of a flat circle right now. It doesn't quite have any meaning. I just go by when the sun sets. Or as what politician was that last week that said we weren't going to have any more sunsets? What was
it was Tim Smith, wasn't it?
Tim Smith.
Wilson.
Tim Wilson. That's right.
Tim Wilson. Sorry.
Tim Wilson.
Tim Smith is, I think, a different politician.
Yeah,
but not the one I think of.
Tim Wilson, farewell to the last sunset we'll have in stage 3, as though stage 4 features no sunsets. Sunsets are illegal now, according to Dan Andrews, apparently. I don't know.
Apparently, and people were also quick to point out to him that, even under curfew, you can still go out and watch a sunset because the sun sets at 5:30.
The sun is available before sunset is available before curfew, and also there is you can still be outside
and just
in your backyard.
Reading the replies to that tweet were fantastic because people just kept pointing that out to him, being like, you can still go, because clearly what he meant, I think what he meant to tweet was to say, and so the sun sets on the last day before Melbourne has a curfew or something some bullshit like that. But the way he said it was just there goes the last sunset of Melbourne without a curfew, and you're like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? But yeah, people kept pointing out to me like, you can still go to that lovely sunset that you're looking at on the beach, like at 5:30, like because clearly you live around there.
Only for now.
Sun is available.
But then he was like, yeah, but there's still a curfew. Like, yeah, we know. We know, Tim.
Yeah. His responses were...
Remember.
Leave the poetry to John Dunn, mate. Okay? You can clear William Blake and Tim Wilson not at the same level of appreciating the aesthetic beauty of the world. Let's just say that.
But like in true political style, like he chose that hill to die on, and he died on it.
He died on it really hard.
And boy, did he.
His replies to the tweets were probably way more, like, for lack of a better word, cunty than they needed to be. All he had to go and say, this is what I meant, but then he chose to be like really blunt. And anyway,
don't you have some chair of economic something or other to go and be doing right now? Like, why do you have time to tweet at all? What's happening? Minister for Parliament.
Delayed.
Yeah, Parliament's delayed, and he just wants to tweet about how Labor's fucking up the lockdown, apparently.
Yeah. Just the world.
Actually, here's a question actually for you guys, because there's been a bunch of articles this week, news reports which have come out from not necessarily just Murdoch Media. So,
let me get my poll fingers ready. Let's go. What's the poll?
So, is anger at the Andrews government justified for some of the alleged bungles that they have made, whether it be at cabinet level or whether it be at the departmental level? Like, should we be angry at the Victorian government to some degree?
It depends which thing you're angry about, right? Like, I mean, stuff like for, as I understand it, like for aged care and all that sort of stuff, that's a federal matter, right?
Well, some of it's federal, some of it's private. The federal stuff, I probably think it's unfair to blame the state government for the federal shit. But then, we talked about the housing tower lockdowns a few weeks ago, and that was absolutely fucked. And they deserve the criticism for that and the scorn.
Yeah,
because that was handled really poorly. And the hotel lockdown, as you sort of just said as well, for all culpability for that, of course. But at the same time, you can still say they're doing a lot of things right.
The other thing that Channel 9 were alleging, just for context, was that they were saying that apparently in the months in June when we were winding down they were winding down basically the amount of contact traces they had. So they only had a couple of hundred or something contact traces. Now they've got like over 1,000. But apparently in terms of that scalability of the contact tracing workforce, it wasn't immediately sort of jumped on. So the point being is that apparently, according to Channel 9, that that where they could have had extra resources to help with contact tracing in the early days of the second wave, that may have avoided some of the
problem with that, and I think there are certain elements of that criticism that are justified. We've got Joaquin, friend of the show, Joaquin, writing in saying, I'm too high for this right now. I know, Joaquin, I sympathize. We're getting deep into government policy, Joaquin. This may not be the show for you at this exact moment in time.
Come back later. Come back in like 15 minutes.
Once we've gone past the policy discussion.
But something to think about while you're away. They are listening and they are watching you.
For sure.
All right, George, continue.
It is one of those things where it's like, you can't really win.
No.
If you're in the position of the Andrews government right now, you can't win because say that they kept all of those contact traces on the government payroll, soaking up a bunch of money when there wasn't work to be done. The immediate criticism from the conservative media and the conservative side of politics and the whole propaganda apparatus would have been, what a waste of taxpayer dollars, that they've got all these people on the public payroll, they're not being used for any good purpose, and this is a waste of money. Until, of course, the situation arises where they are needed, in which case the supply wasn't high enough in the first case to begin with, and that's also the fault of the Andrews government. You know what I mean? Like, it's an unwinnable situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Tom's right. There are certainly questions around how the hotel quarantine was instituted and measured. And there were some articles this week that came out saying the reason one of the institutions that was hired to do the hotel quarantine security, Unified, was basically sort of a diversity hire. That was the language that they used, and was sort of ill-prepared and ill-equipped to actually handle.
I did hear that some of the training was non-existent.
Yeah,
from the actual organisation that was contracted to do it.
And a lot of recruiters, like the people that were recruited, were literally like found via WhatsApp message groups. You know, it wasn't a very formal process. That being said, you also have to acknowledge that this was one leg of a whole centipede of legs worth of responses to the coronavirus in different areas in a time that was very rushed. And so you don't necessarily have the benefit of saying, well, yeah, with the benefit of hindsight, we probably should have done it with the assistance of the federal government. We weren't really thinking too in depth about that. And when Dan Andrews personally has been asked about that, he's basically just like, I don't know. Like, I personally didn't handle that part of it, because this was early days in an unfolding crisis. A lot of stuff got delegated out and wasn't done perfectly. And I don't know, it's a bit rich of the federal government to stick the boot in when they had a pretty like hashed response to the JobKeeper and JobSeeker sort of wage subsidy emergencies. Like they made an absolute hash of that, made a $60 billion mistake. And I guess we've forgiven them for that, but they're using this opportunity to stick the boot into the Victorian Labor government. That seems a bit rich.
It's definitely one of those things. It's like, it's never just one error that causes something. Normally it's a series of, cascade of errors, right? That leads to something. But yeah, you're right. I think, the federal government, Scott Morrison himself actually has been very reserved, I think, in his commentary.
But Josh Frydenberg was less so.
Yes. Josh Frydenberg's on a few ones.
And Tim Wilson and his sunset.
Yes, and Tim Wilson and his sunset.
But, so I guess, the point is, though, is that with a virus like this, with such long lead times where it can stay dormant or asymptomatic in people for weeks and weeks, it is really hard to have something like this properly contained. And if any one part of the response is lacking, then you have a situation, it can easily escalate and get out of control. The law of exponential numbers means one case becomes 4 cases, becomes 8 cases, becomes 16 cases, becomes 32, becomes 64. Like one slip up in one area, which is not even necessarily the direct result of total ineptitude. Like it was, like you say, a series of little things that weren't handled well in succession, can lead to a situation like we are back in Victoria now, where we're getting, well, I think the count today was high 300s or something like that, but it was, up to 700 over 700 at its peak. So this is a virus that can spiral out of control really quickly without it necessary for you to have made a huge fuck up. And also, and not to do the whataboutism that the conservative side of politics does so frequently, but also, Ruby Princess, ?
Which that was effectively, I think we've realised it's more border forces.
If we're talking about gigantic fuck-ups that risked coronavirus spreading into the community quite substantially.
Gigantic fuck-ups that cascaded to lots of other smaller fuck-ups. Yeah.
That was also one. And I don't see the LNP taking big hot dumps over the New South Wales government over that nearly as much as they should be. For the focus on Victoria seems to be purely political. Right?
Yeah. There's definitely a push by conservative outlets. Plus also, I think, not just conservative outlets, but news outlets in general, just looking for some stories to direct people's
and I do think, having looked at Josh Frydenberg's comments this week, it did seem as though it was in response to a journalist question. And my response is to say, it's unsurprising that someone from the opposite side of politics is happy to put the boot in to a state of the opposite party than them, right? But what is the responsibility of the journalist in that point to ask such an obvious leading question?
Yeah, but also,
you know what I mean? Like, how is it helpful?
The job is to ask questions. Like, there's been death threats apparently and other stuff. abuse towards journalists because people are trying to stick up for the Premier, basically. But apparently...
But hang on, where is the utility to... and maybe Tom, as someone who studied journalism, can speak to this a little bit more. But like, what is the utility? What is the public good in firing up that kind of adversarial, both sides of politics canon right now? Like in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of a crisis, we need our government working, like all levels of federal and state government, finish your words, George, working well together. What is the utility of bringing that sort of like partisan infighting narrative into it at this point? Like, what's the usefulness of that?
Governments should be scrutinised, right? They have
sure, but
they would argue that that's not what they're bringing. That's not what they're bringing into it. Like that's the result of it, right? But they wouldn't think, the journalist wouldn't be there thinking, let's stir some party shit. They would they might honestly think, like, you know, there's at least feelings from the public that they're bungling this. So to see what this politician I have in front of me has to say about said bungling, because, you know, it's weird. You'd look at it in that sense of, I'm a journalist, it's my responsibility to inform the public. I'm the fourth estate or whatever. All that sort of stuff. That if the vibe you're getting either from yourself, your editors, or your readers is that you think that Dan Andrews is fucking this up, then yeah, you're going to be asking someone, hey, is Dan Andrews fucking this up? What do you think about that?
Yeah,
and that's how
I just wonder what the
I don't
actual...
think they'll see it as cut and dry, like, hey, let's just have some infighting because that sells newspapers. It might, but...
I think there is sometimes I do wonder if there is not a substantial portion of the media that is like the whole leadership speculation over the leadership challenge, you know, like with Kevin and Julia the first time, Kevin and Julia the second time, with Malcolm Turnbull and Tony Abbott, and then Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull again, potentially later on. Like, I do think the media is responsible for creating
an environment where that can prosper.
Yeah, almost like creating a borderline sort of moral panic, which then once it institutes itself as a narrative, then becomes sort of self-perpetuating and sort of drives the news cycle. And it's not any one person that's like whose fault it is, but like what it ends up doing is like it throws gasoline on the fire and basically allows this thing to sort of kickstart a chain reaction.
Gives it oxygen.
Yeah,
well, that's why there's been some very interesting some commentary that I've seen around this like line of questioning has been about Dan Andrews' Premier's press conferences. That like after he does his announcements on the restrictions and all that sort of stuff, he sticks around until no one has any questions. Like there's none of that like, all right, no further questions and I'm out of here.
Right.
People like, you know, the journalists are allowed to grill him on the finer details and the specifics. And I'm not exactly sure what the question that were directed at him were for this quote, but he essentially said at some point to some journalists, like, why aren't you asking Dutton these questions? Because they were directing things at him that he was like, well, this isn't my thing. I know I'm the one who's here, but I'm not the guy to ask.
And I think it's actually it is what I want out of government, right? Is to make themselves available, especially in times of crisis, to answer questions and be accountable to the public. But I also think from a purely partisan perspective, I think it's a weakness on the side of lefties that we feel as though we have the onus to speak to the public and give them these kinds of answers. And the other side of politics, when they don't like the coverage that they're getting, they simply abstain from press conferences and being questioned on this kind of stuff. Like Scott Morrison's favorite thing to say when a journalist asks him a question he doesn't like is to say, well, I don't agree with the premise of the question. And it's like, you don't get to agree or not with the premise of the question. Your job is to answer the question, not to swiftly move the fuck on. Like that. They seem much more adept at that political spin element than Labor does.
I guess that's what a lot of the journalists said in response to, like, you know, because when, the whole, like, yeah, why aren't you asking Peter Dutton this? I saw, like, a bunch of journalists on Twitter be like, mate, we'd love to. I would love for Peter Dutton to do what you're doing and to not leave that podium until we're out of questions.
But the problem is that the exposure, that it gives you to the public by standing up there and answering every single question until everyone's out of questions, whilst I think it is a good government thing to do, leaves you. It gives you additional exposure.
Can go either way, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
It's definitely risky.
I think, and the thing is, at the moment, and looking at some associates that I have on Facebook, acquaintances, there's a lot of anger and a lot of frustration in the community, and people are seizing on the sound bites of whether it be Alan Jones using things and stuff out of context, or whether it just be a clip from Channel 9 or whatever it is. Like, if they can get something which reinforces their point of view or substantiates their frustration and anger, what it means is that it just creates another, as we said, it gives oxygen to an issue that's maybe not as cut and dry or as black and white as what people want it to be.
And I think especially now we're entering an age where so many people they're unemployed, they're at home, they got nothing to do but troll Twitter all day, and you essentially, the news organizations, to a certain extent, certainly those owned by Murdoch, are more than happy to make hay when the sun is shining and use this as gristle for the propaganda mill. Like, there really is especially when you look at things like Sky News, when you look at the Herald Sun, these are members of the Murdoch press that are happy to dig in, to stick the boot in when things are going badly, and even when things are going well, or the work that's being done by the government is admirable, to still undermine and question and introduce narratives that are just completely false. Like, at a certain point, that whole thing with Sky News, Alan Jones saying people, masks don't work, lockdowns don't work, they're stealing your freedoms. Like, that is a narrative that is generated out of whole cloth, that is not based in fact or science. And
he's allowed to say it. So,
he's allowed to say it, and then he gets amplified by people who...
Adam's acquaintances.
And associates.
Exclusively Adam's acquaintances and associates.
I guess it's probably a good way to transition now overseas in talking about anti-government sentiment and discord and that kind of thing, to Beirut, which has had a bad time this week.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's been no news to anyone unless you've been living out in the wilderness. But if you're living out in the wilderness, then
don't come back.
Don't come back from the wilderness. Stay at home.
Unless you're coming on a cruise ship, in which case that's fine. Do what you like.
Dock in the city. So obviously there was the massive explosion this week in the port of Beirut, which has wounded and injured thousands, up to probably over 5,000, and killed over like 140 people at this point. Probably more as we're speaking. There's probably more. That count's probably rising.
Yeah.
I guess that's not really interesting in the sense that it's a tragedy, and we obviously, our thoughts are with all the people that are affected. What's perhaps been more interesting from a political point of view is the reaction after the fact. And also the as we said, it's a cascading of these things sometimes happen after a cascading series of events and errors, which lead to a mass event like this. Looking at all that is kind of interesting. So I guess for context, what happened was that 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate blew up in the port. So the questions are, at the moment, why was that left there?
Yeah, why was it there? How did it blow up?
And what's going to happen now? So you guys can cut in at any point if you want, otherwise I can keep telling the story. I don't know a lot of details sort of about the specifics of like why all the stuff was there and then it blew up. I've just seen a lot of the videos, just like I've seen like 4 different perspectives from people. Like probably the most insane one being some people who were out on a boat ages offshore, and they could just see the smoke kind of going up and being like, what the heck? And then suddenly it blooms into that mushroom, like cloud, almost nuclear look. Yeah. It is the same size explosion as a 3 kiloton nuclear warhead.
Oh, wow.
So tactical nukes, which Donald Trump has recently expressed interest in exploring and testing.
Great.
Again. So a kiloton is 1,000 tons of. When I talk about a kiloton, and they talk about explosion sort of energy sort of output, they talk about it in kilotons, and that's to do with how many tons of TNT the equivalent of that would be blowing up, right? It's basically 3,000 tons of TNT blowing up, which you can have nukes that can go around that size, and that would have a similar effect in terms of the energy output.
Obviously, so not the same sort of footprint in terms of radiation and sort of nuclear fallout and those other sort of second order effects that you have with a nuclear explosion. But like
the shockwave,
in terms of the explosion, it literally looked. Yeah, like when I was looking at the videos, it literally looked like a nuke went off in terms of the shockwave, the mushroom cloud. Like it was really quite scary.
A reason is that it effectively did in terms of so which is probably another reason why nukes are bad. But anyway, that's a separate conversation.
I mean, nukes are bad is a whole podcast by itself.
Yeah, if you needed another reason for nukes to be bad.
So essentially, the situation was in 2013, a ship from Moldova called the Rosus. Rosus, entered Beirut's port after suffering technical problems during its journey from Georgia to Mozambique. It was inspected and it was banned from sailing onwards and was shortly afterwards abandoned by its owners, sparking several legal claims. So the cargo on the ship was the substantial amount of ammonium nitrate, which is generally used as a fertilizer, but can be used also as one of the ingredients of explosives. So generally, like when you do a bomb test, like when you go through an airport and they run that little scanner over you, one of the things that they're looking for is ammonium nitrate. And if you've been recently handling fertilizer and you go through one of those scanners, it's going to pick up on it for that reason. So this was the material that was used in the Oklahoma City bombing in 95, I think that was, where Timothy McVeigh bombed a government building. It is a notoriously dangerous and, if left unchecked over time, unstable material, and that's exactly what happened. Is it sat in a port, not being stored correctly since 2013, and we're not sure what the exact sort of inciting incident was. That
there was a fire in the warehouse.
Who knows?
By the video clip we're looking at, there was already a substantial fire going on before the explosion went off.
But the problem is once this material has sort of hardened, if it's left stored improperly over time, it basically becomes like a shell casing for an explosive. So when that material does combust, it does so very explosively. So it's not just like a fire that's a chemical reaction that takes place. It's an actual explosion. So essentially, the Lebanese government was baking a bomb on their dock for the last 6 years, and it exploded. It was literally a ticking time bomb.
And there's a lot of finger pointing sort of going on back and forth now. And 19 people have been arrested. A number of government MPs have stepped down.
Yeah.
And there are hundreds now protesting on the streets of Beirut. People have been wounded. There have been other arrests as well.
It is the perfect example of when someone says the free market can do no wrong. This is exactly why that is horseshit. Because what you have here is everyone acting in their own best fiscal, financial interest, looking after their interest. For the ship owners, it was to run a boat with a terrible maintenance record in order to cut corners and try and maximize profits. It was then in their interest to abandon that boat and cut their losses at that stage in 2013. It was in the financial interests of the leaders in Lebanon to not do anything about it or store it properly and clean it because they didn't have the budget, they didn't have the political will. Everyone is acting in their own best interest, and now it's caused loss of life in excess of 140 deaths, billions of dollars worth of property damage, I would imagine. It's completely evaporated entire buildings around that area and is releasing toxic gas into the atmosphere. The amount of economic impact of this would be measured in the billions of dollars.
It is assessed at being tens of billions of dollars. The part of the problem as well.
But just to finish my point,
Yeah, you're right.
It's like no one person is responsible for that, right?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It is the very definition of a market failure, because no one person was ever like fiscally benefited from dealing with this problem. And what you've got now is a tragedy of the commons, where everyone's looking out for their own best interests, and it's ruined the situation for everyone. So for those who say the free market fixes everything, I would say this is a situation where regulation might have had some benefit. Do you not think?
But the complications around the unique circumstances of Lebanon make that a little bit harder. So to have a well-regulated system in Lebanon,
You need a functioning government first.
So that's point one, is that before this happened, there's a number of things that we need to consider. So Lebanon was already in a political crisis where they were sort of in a political stalemate in terms of being able to move forward. At the moment, they're calling for a new election to move things along. I'm not sure what the exact circumstances are, whether or not they've got like a government sort of caretaker government situation or what it is. I'm not sure. But the point being is most people are reporting that the government's in sort of a non-functional crisis. Corruption is a massive issue. People are talking about, is it the Port Authority's fault? Is it the government's fault? Whose fault actually is it? You look into it a bit further. There's also Hezbollah that are hanging around. So Hezbollah effectively are a terrorist organisation called Israel.
The conflict on the border, right?
Right. So Hezbollah are a major. They're two things. They're a political party in Lebanon that holds and has held over the last decade a significant amount of power within the Lebanese government, but they're also in their own rights a militia basically that can send people off, basically a private arms, PMC effectively for Lebanon that has been involved in Syria and other areas as well. So there's that aspect, and because the port is used by Hezbollah to smuggle stuff overseas, so whether or not that's had anything to do with it, Hezbollah are being very quick to come out and go, no, not our fault, not our fault. And if you say it's our fault, we'll retaliate. That's literally what the leader said the other day. And the other side of it is as well is that their currency is just dying. Like it's devalued by hundreds of % over the last I don't know how long, maybe let's say a year.
I mean, it's the biggest economic crisis that they've experienced since the Civil War, which between 75 and 1990. So it's and obviously against the backdrop of like coronavirus infections and that spiking and that putting the normal dampening on the economy that it's done elsewhere means that they're in a really problematic situation right now. And not just that, but like there's these grain silos where a lot of just near the site of the explosion where a lot of food, a lot of grain was being stored. And so now you've got a situation potentially where they might experience food insecurity and stuff now as well.
So the question is really what happens now, right? Like how do they recover from this? And it's hard. Like I don't know. Federal foreign governments like France have pledged assistance and other stuff like that. Even Israel, I think, to an extent, who are like their sworn enemy. Don't forget they had a war in 2006. Even that, they've said, "Oh, we'll help you out if
even Israel's like, bro, you fucked up. You need some help."
And you probably can't make many jokes about it, but I guess it's an example of how bad things can get if and what a cascading series of failures can lead to, which probably puts the stuff in Victoria in a bit of perspective, I think, in some ways.
Yeah. No, we I remember the podcast that I listened to called The Bugle, where that's sort of a satire about news and current affairs and stuff all across the world, and they've got a correspondent who lives primarily in India. And he was saying like, you guys in Britain with your adorable political scandals where people are only stealing like tens of thousands of dollars, like that's hilarious. In India, our politicians steal like billions of dollars. Like the political scandals in India are like way more like on another level in terms of the ineptitude, the theft, like is just absolutely rife in Indian political life. And he's like, sports rorts, they made away with $10,000. That's adorable. Like,
it's like, I'll vote for them tomorrow.
It gives you it gives you an appreciation for like how competent our government actually is. Like regardless of left or right or which party you like our government most of the time functions more or less correctly. And that's actually a blessing historically.
I've been hearing that just on a similar sort of scale with a friend who lives in the UK when we just went into stage 4 lockdown because we were just like, because it's our friend Alana's partner was who I was talking to, because since she was keeping tabs on what's happening here because of family and friends and everything, he was like, I am jealous of your decisive, sensible government in your state doing that, because you look at what Boris Johnson's up to and sort of being like, let's reopen the country. And then the day before they plan to reopen the country going, oh, actually, maybe it's not the best idea. We won't. I was like, oh, at the 11th hours when you come to your senses.
Back it up.
It's just, if I was a political cartoonist, the obvious choice would be a truck called The Economy and then just the beep, beep, beep noise as it makes as it backs up. That seems like the obvious.
It's not even a truck. It's like a 3,000-ton train trying to reverse.
I think
but it's a freight train.
In Boris Johnson's case, it should be a bus.
A bus. He loves a good bus, Boris. Our Boris. My grandparents love Boris. Do you know that?
Of course they do.
They love Boris.
Why not?
Dude, what? Okay.
He's another one of those. He's in the Alex Jones camp for me in that, like, I hate them and everything they stand for, but I love his voice. I hear Boris Johnson speak, and I'm like, God, I love that accent.
Honestly, you can't even tell me at this point that politics isn't 90% just like how good you are of a communicator. Like, clearly it's got almost nothing to do with your competence, with your plan. Like, I think a lot of people are just making it up as they go along, but they happen to be real charismatic, and so we elected them for 3 terms.
If you feel like you could grab a beer with them, that's your man.
Speaking of epic communicators, Mr. Trump has been communicating this week.
He has had a week. You guys watched that? Was it Axios? Is that how you pronounce it? The Axios interview?
Got so many questions about that.
The whole 40 minutes, and it was
40 minutes of it?
Yeah. The highlights are going around, but it's a 40-minute interview.
Yeah.
I watched the whole thing. It's incredible. Jonathan Swan, the journalist,
batshit.
Is amazing.
So, funny story.
What is Axios? And how did he get the interview?
So a few different things. So Jonathan Swan is the son of physician and journalist Norman Swan, who is the co-host of the CoronaCast podcast that we've talked about.
He's like health advisor, expert person on everything.
He's quite an accomplished journalist in his own right, obviously, aside from that. But he works for an organization called Axios, which is it's sort of an American's, like the response to The Economist. The Economist magazine in Britain is how I think of it. They're quite sort of socially liberal and switched on, but quite economically and fiscally conservative on a bunch of issues. So they have conservative leanings and sympathies, but they're not batshit conservative news like, Fox and Breitbart and OWN, that sort of thing. That's the thinking conservatives. Sorry, go on.
Is that why he got an interview with him in the first place?
That's what I think. Yeah. So if you look at the interview that Trump did a couple of weeks ago, it was with Chris Wallace, who is on Fox, but he is one of the sensible people on Fox. So a real journalist. And you look at the interview he did, whatever it was last week, or was with Jonathan Swan, who's like a competent journalist, but has Trump sympathy. So they're wanting to do something beyond just like, Trump goes on Tucker Carlson and gets interviewed by his batshit crazy mate who will back up all the batshit crazy stuff that he said. They want someone yes, exactly. The White House, as I think particularly his campaign team, is looking for operational legitimacy by being interviewed by these more center-right, like sensible conservative voices rather than just the batshit ones.
If they were wanting him to come out of that interview looking like, it's like, oh no, he's not just talking to his mates. See, he's convincing and in the right to people who aren't like blowing smoke up his ass. If that was the goal, you fucked it.
Mission accomplished.
Because
we did it.
shit.
Mission accomplished, Donald. You did it.
I imagine like a Philip Seymour Hoffman of the Hunger Games kind of person just sitting in the back of the room being like, yes, it's working. It's working. Like playing cards kind of thing.
See, I was thinking more you've just got Trump's media advisor person just in the background, just like, he says something and it's going...
Fuck.
Putting their head into their hands, like they're behind the journalist watching Trump going, oh shit.
There's a great comedian, I think his name's Michael McKean or something like that. He does these great videos where basically he's like the aide in the back room on the headset telling the politicians what to say. And he's got a whole series of them on Trump. And they're just fantastic of like, no, why would you say that? No, you're wanting to say it's not a big deal. And many tests, and we've done a lot of them. No, you're wanting to say, why are you continuing down this line? Like, as though he's the guy in the earpiece. It's so fucking funny. Like,
yeah, but just hearing like Jonathan Swan, like pull him up on stuff, like when Trump was trying to say like, another, like, because he said such batshit things as being like, how great am I? When I got into office, there wasn't even a test for coronavirus. And Jonathan was just like, well, yeah, of course there wouldn't have been a test. The disease didn't exist.
Yeah.
And like, you're going to see his face just being like, what?
He's now become an overnight meme, right?
Yes.
The memes are amazing.
The
like,
Jonathan
Trump
Swan...
him charts and stuff that he'd look at and then just like squint. And you can see him by the end of the interview. He's just like haggard and sleep deprived. Just like, oh my God, more of this.
As his face, his incredulous... like, what are you talking about face is now an internet meme. Like when someone...
Which is one reason I love like that, the way he handled the interview. Because he like, some people might be like, oh, it's unprofessional just to be all like, and pulling weird faces like that. But it's like, no, you're being told complete bullshit.
I think that's
to
only...
be confused.
I think that's the only sensible reaction you can really have when faced with a fire hose of bullshit like that. Is to just be like, what? Huh? Like, what are you talking about? This is what you're saying is crazy. And you have to know, like, I can't just be a sycophant and sit here and act like this is normal. Like, you're saying fucking insane shit. Like, the reason that these Homeland Security officers in Portland recently couldn't wear badges is because they were going to get doxxed by Antifa. Like, that's fucking crazy. That's crazy. You're crazy. That is a crazy thing you just said. That's insane. The only response to that is, huh?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, he did it beautifully. So yeah, Trump has had a week.
And I wonder how, to the extent that Jonathan Swan's trying to like maintain the relationship there, because I really felt like he was trying to come at it from like a good faith. Like, I'm on your side.
He was speaking his language, wasn't he? Because like he brought something up about like, like, because he just cancelled the RNC or whatever, and he was saying like, oh, but I've had people come out, huge crowds, blah 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 blah, and he actually, I thought this was really genius of him. Like he spoke his language in the, I'm not disputing your ability to draw a crowd.
You're
I've
awesome.
covered you for 5 years. I have seen your fans. I've seen them come out. They love you. I've spoken to them. They really like you for these reasons. Like buttering that up, but he still didn't lose the integrity of. Like, no, but I'm asking you about, like, why you think it's safe to hold, like, rallies like that. Like, I'm not disputing that you can't hold one because you're Donald Trump. You can hold a rally.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, good. Mwah, you are nailing this interview, Jonathan.
It's basically the one thing that Donald Trump is actually competent to do is to run a rally. Like
he can ramble in front of a crowd.
I started watching with Elle. I think it's Now They See Us. Now They. American television series, which is about effectively 5 African American teenagers in New York back in '89 that were wrongfully convicted of a rape and
the Central Park 5.
Oh, right.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
So what's really interesting though is there's the whole police and bias and that kind of thing. That's one issue. The second thing, which they really hammer home in the first episode, is that Donald Trump, even back in '89, was just stirring the coals,
taking like full page ads out, calling for their heads and saying they deserve the death penalty and all this sort of stuff.
They literally spent an entire scene just debating about, and like they even say at one point, like, Oh, he just wants his 5 minutes of fame. He'll go away soon.
Mm.
And it's like,
I actually love those dramatic irony moments in films where they're like, TVs, that'll never catch on.
literally.
This moron certainly won't become the most powerful person in the world in control of the entire nuclear arsenal that follows him around with a puck everywhere that he goes. Certainly not.
Well, that's what I've been finding. Before we get on to, I know because there's a story that we want to talk about here that's a bit more fun and jovial, which is why we brought up Trump. But also it's quite scary. I've been reading Mary Trump's book, the book by Trump's niece, just about his upbringing. She's a clinical psychologist, just talking like both from her firsthand experience of being in the family, but also just like her analysis of his narcissism and all this sort of stuff. And there's a lot of that, George, like that sort of irony in it. It's not so much like, it's more dramatic irony of like, as you're reading all these things that this young Donald did, or the things that were happening around him, and you're like, fuck, this is the guy who becomes president.
The president.
Like, hearing about how abusive his father was, just how damaged his parents were to be raising him, and then all the like the personality traits that he showed that like they cultivated, like the big thing being that his older brother, who like by 8 years, like I think there was an 8-year age gap between Donald and his eldest brother, his elder brother, who was the firstborn son. I think they have an older sister. But yeah, like he was the one tipped to be the heir to Trump management or whatever they called it sort of back then. But he really just wasn't, like he just didn't really kind of fit the
But father,
hustling.
I just want to sing.
Well, no, he wanted to be a pilot eventually, but just the sheer level of like abuse that he copped from both Trump Senior and Donald Trump and all those others, just about not doing the family business and being a bus driver in the sky and stuff, just like drove him to be an alcoholic. He died, like he dies from just his alcoholism. He's the reason, allegedly, Trump doesn't drink.
Well, there you go.
He became such an alcoholic.
That's
like,
the lesson.
Don't touch alcohol, Donald.
Don't be a toxic shitbag of a father, but don't drink because that stuff will kill you. That's definitely the lesson.
But given like Fred Trump was so was so gearing him up to be the heir, and so he only cared about his failings and like to drill in like never fail me if you're doing wrong. He like would not only berate, but he'd humiliate and all that sort of stuff. And then when you've got terrified younger Donald watching this, he's like, okay, so to fail is to be humiliated. I'm seeing what I don't ever want to happen. Yeah. And but he would Fred would humiliate his eldest son, like not only for whatever fuck up he perceived to be, but then when he apologized for the fuck up, he'd do it further. So that's
Fred's the father, right?
Yes. Yeah. Frederick Christ Trump.
Jesus Christ.
So like he learned not only never fuck up, but it's like never admit you fucked up. Never be sorry you fucked up because you never fucked up. And just seeing all these like traits berated into him. It's a really interesting
story for Donald now in some ways.
No,
it's a thing of, and she, Mary Trump, I saw her do an interview about it as well, because like clearly she's got an angle in this because she is Fred Jr.'s son, so like it's her father who drank himself to death and all that and was abused by the family. So she's clearly got an axe to grind here. So that's why you take it with a bit of a like there's an angle, but at the same time, she talked about it in the sense of like he's an adult, he's like responsible for his actions, he's accountable, but you can also see a sympathetic side of the child who was abused into this adulthood.
You can understand where it came from, but you don't need to excuse the lack of responsibility that the subsequent adult has taken for their actions and for their mental health and their stability and all that sort of stuff. At a certain point, it's your responsibility to be a decent person.
And it's so interesting to see how Donald Trump himself is doing the exact same thing kind of to his kids. Like I don't know so much about abuse or dressing down or whatever, but it's all about like
success,
the one named after him, like, the one with his name, the successor, but kind of that like much more. It's all business. It doesn't seem to be like caring or warm in any sort of way. It's like this cycle of just.
So it's a cycle of abuse.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Interesting read.
It's interesting, like just throwing back to that Axios interview for a second. My fiance Gracie literally had like her hands on her face the entire time because he was saying stuff that was so inept and laughable. And then we had to stop it and pause it and sort of look at each other every now and then and go like, it'd be funny if he wasn't president of the United States. Like if he was just some insane rambling billionaire, you could take it as a grain of salt. You go, this guy's obviously nuts, but like he's nobody. Like he's just some rich guy.
I think it's gotten worse over the last 4 years.
Yes. Yeah, undoubtedly. Because
the mental strain of what he's going on.
No, because I don't think he experiences any mental strain. He doesn't do any of the work that's required of a sitting president. All of that stuff. Anytime he makes a statement, there was a statement of his that I was reading the other day in regards to something to do with like Huawei not being allowed to take part in building their 5G network sort of thing because they're a Chinese company. And he goes, the Huawei and the national security with building the network. And he's like, it sounds like he's reading a hostage statement. He like could not give less of a fuck about the actual job of governing. He just wants to win. And so I don't think that it's like taken it out of him being the president for the last 4 years because he hasn't given it any degree of seriousness or attention.
But you'd think that like you'd grow into being able to.
That's the narrative that they keep trying to spin.
Right?
Anytime he doesn't sound like an alabaster moron, the press gets caught in this narrative of like Trump's new tone. Is Trump coming around and sounding presidential for a change? And it's like, no, still a cunt. Like it's exactly the same every time. At no point. It's a total arrested development. He has never progressed emotionally beyond that young boy getting yelled at by, what was his dad's name? Fred. He's never progressed emotionally beyond that boy being yelled at by Fred Trump. And even though his dad's long in the ground, he still clearly feels that paternal presence. It still guides his actions, even though the guy's not fucking around anymore. Like, he is just a walking, talking bag of psychological issues and narcissism made manifest.
But do you think, like my point was, do you think that
I think
his ramblings, he's freewheeling, which he's always done and been kind of bad at. But
I think it's gotten worse purely.
Gotten worse, and why has it gotten worse?
I think it's just purely because it's cognitive decline. He's just getting older. Like, and whatever mental issues he's got are clearly being exacerbated by his old age. Like, that's just a function of being old.
Probably not so much the work of being the president, because I agree, George. Like, he
hasn't done the work.
He's not doing the work to the extent that other presidents have, I'd imagine. But probably the lifestyle of being in the White House is just getting to him, because it's not quite like, even though he takes a shit ton of golfing days and all this kind of bullshit, it's clearly like more work than
he's ever done.
Right? Yeah, than he's used to, in that sense of probably like flying to all these different places to do all these different speeches, to do all these like, it's probably getting to him.
The schedule would be getting to him, right?
Yeah, the schedule would be getting to him, and so I'd say it'd definitely be cognitive decline. Though I'm not an expert.
Also, I think if he does get reelected, you will see a further increasingly precipitous decline as he realizes he is no longer accountable to voters in another election cycle. So this is Trump on his best behavior when he's trying to get reelected. Think about what he would look like after he's been elected for a second term and gives zero fucks completely about what people think about him.
Remember, like, I guess Obama at the end of his second term, kind of like, he was sort of doing it in the other way of trying to get all this shit through because he's not accountable to voters anymore. So he can just do it. He doesn't have to worry about his political future.
He can just ram it through.
Get these good, try to get these things through that he sees are good before anyone can take hold and fuck it, kind of thing. So we'll probably just see that, but it's Trump's agenda rather than Obama's agenda. So, but speaking of him wanting to win China and his agenda,
yes.
George, you're gonna have to delete our account because Trump's banning TikTok. He's banning TikTok in the States.
Yeah. So what Donald Trump has done is he signed an executive order that would effectively ban TikTok and WeChat in the United States, not in Australia. Now, Scott Morrison has said that the Australian government is thoroughly investigating whether or not TikTok does pose a security risk and could potentially see a similar move here. But the reason all of this is news is because... So, okay, so a few things on TikTok being banned. It's based on, like quote unquote national security interests and all this sort of stuff. It's coming from the perspective of it is because the company that owns it, that the company that owns TikTok is a Chinese company. There could potentially be, like, no one disputes that TikTok is a vast intelligence gathering apparatus, right? Like every other social media company, probably less so than some of the ones that we're more familiar and comfortable with. Like Facebook actively tracks your website visits to other websites and user data and that sort of purchase behavior and stuff
that's Cambridge Analytica,
Clearview AI, which was the company that stripped
the facial recognition thing.
Yes, millions of Facebook images of people's faces to use for its face as a training data set and database for its facial recognition technology. Facebook has got a terrible record when it comes to privacy, worse than TikTok. The problem is if it is a company that is owned by a company that is based in China, presumably this kind of data, even in an aggregate anonymized form, so like whether you like a particular TikTok or, post your own or whatever, is not of particular relevance to the Chinese government.
Your address and
that stuff wouldn't particularly be useful. Mass surveillance on that scale from China to US citizens or Australian citizens is not useful. But having data in the aggregate around what people in Australia, what kinds of things they're looking at, what kinds of things they're interested in, what the demographics are doing, where their attention is, that would be particularly useful for a government that was, for any government, right? Whether they're wanting to peddle propaganda or no matter what their intentions are, having vast swathes of group data is still useful.
Vis-a-vis Russia.
Yeah, it could be amplifying propaganda. It could be for any number of reasons that this data could be useful for a foreign government, especially one that we would consider classify as a bad actor like China.
And I guess the thing as well is that the reason why people are worried is that the links between business and the Chinese Communist Party sometimes are blurred.
Historically have been, mushy, to say the least.
And there is obviously even if there aren't any existing links, could Beijing at some point exert undue influence onto that parent company, which would filter down into TikTok?
Well, I mean, we've already seen it happen. There have been reports that the US subsidiary, TikTok, has bristled at previous attempts from the Chinese government to be more censorious on their platform about content that is anti-communist. So who knows how far those internal discussions have gone, how much content has actually been censored, that sort of thing. But certainly the thing is like whether or not, like from all reports, the traffic is going to Amazon Web Services and things like that, which are US based. There hasn't been any evidence put forward that this information is being shared with the Chinese government, and the company claims it would refuse to do so if asked. But even if, say, all of that stuff is true, the Chinese government has a pretty substantial cybersecurity hacking apparatus. If we're sharing this personal private information with Gmail, which we are, this and more, or Facebook or Instagram, I feel as though it's reasonable to expect that the Chinese government could get access to that data in other ways if they wanted to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There was a brute force attack on Telstra the other day, here in Australia.
Oh, yeah.
Part of the Telstra network just died.
Telstra is our nation's largest telecommunications provider.
And as to whether or not where that came from, we don't really know. Well, it might be known, but I don't know what it is yet. But the point being is that, if someone or an organization wants to hack a large, government or national, telecommunications provider, they can.
It's happening. We don't need Huawei to build our 5G infrastructure for them for the Chinese government to be able to get access to it. Like it's not necessary. It doesn't necessitate them having to do that for them to get what they need. In fact,
it makes it easier.
It makes it easier, sure, if they lay the cables. But I don't think anyone is really disputing at this stage that the Chinese intelligence gathering apparatus, will happily take your TikTok swipes and that sort of information, but it doesn't need it. They've already got a file on you as big as the Stasi, because Facebook does. So they have it. You know what I mean?
It'll be interesting though as well, because I guess depending on the specifics of the executive order that Trump has issued for this as to what it bans, because if it's banning or severely limiting services that are connected to Tencent, which is the parent company of TikTok and all these others. Tencent have their fingers in a lot of pies, particularly in gaming, because they have a minority stake. I think it's 40% stake in Epic. Them running the Epic Game Store is their version of Steam and their distribution platform. But Epic develops Fortnite.
Right.
Yeah.
They have a stake in PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, and they own Riot Games, which makes League of Legends, which is one of the massive esports and all that sort of stuff. So it's just whether or not this turns into through this executive order, is Trump coming for Fortnite? Because
well, it's an unspecified ban on transactions. So what does that mean?
So
is the internet traffic of me playing a game of Fortnite?
It takes effect in 45 days as well. It's not effective immediately. It's there's a lag as to when this.
Because also Microsoft is
so there were
dancing around maybe buying TikTok or something.
Which
I don't know. I'm not.
They're interested in it. They've confirmed their interest in buying it.
But the problem being, of course, that Donald Trump, even when he's doing something that could be considered good, is still Donald Trump. So he was saying, we facilitated this potential sale to Microsoft, so the US government should get a cut. And everyone's like, that's not how anything works.
No.
That's not.
What are you talking about?
You don't get a finder's fee, bro, for forcing legislation that made a company illegal. You don't get money for that. That's not how anything works.
It's like an agent's fee, we'll take 10%.
I'll just take my commission and
commission. Yeah.
But that's exactly how Trump just works always, right? It's always the make something impossible and then sell the solution.
And it's not just TikTok, it's also WeChat as well, which is a huge platform for people that might be Chinese expats talking to family back home or whatever it may be. WeChat's huge.
Because a lot of Google and those sorts of products are banned in China. So you're not allowed to use them in order to facilitate conversation with people in China. Then
there's the conspiracy theory angle as well.
I think it's really just... Trump is mad at TikTokers because they embarrass him. I think it's literally as simple as that.
It's probably not even really a conspiracy theory now to think about it. Just more probably quite a plausible theory. After all that stuff of teens on TikTok, using that to kind of spread around all the the K-pop things and all that were all hey, maybe book tickets to Trump's rally or express interest in Trump's rally to troll them into nobody turning up and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, maybe he's just I hate that thing made fun of me. Ban that thing.
Yep.
I want revenge. What can we say about it? Well, it's Chinese owned, national security. Done.
Yeah. I think that's literally the beginning and end of it is he's just a jealous venal piece of shit. And they criticized, they got one over on him. And so he's got to hit back. But
he's declared it a national emergency.
At least he's got his priorities right. At least he's focused on the rights. In the middle of an epidemic that's claiming the lives of 1,000 Americans a day, it's good that Donald Trump is focused on the right stuff.
Mate, I know so many people are dying, but if I see one more TikTok video of someone converting a camper van into an amazing fucking home, yeah, I'd want to ban it too.
You should send me some of those TikToks. It sounds like something I'd be into. Tiny homes.
I was intrigued at first. Whenever I see them, I'm like, oh wow, that's some good craftsmanship. And then every time I'm like, if I'm scrolling through TikTok and then my partner sees it, she's like, ugh, rich people. Seeing people like buzz sawing like granite bench tops into a car.
But Tom, tiny homes are the economic answer for our generation to live in a home. True. They're just tiny.
Nah, see, the TikTok trend that I'm glad to see still continue are those people who just like to drop things off a tower onto a giant axe.
I think, Tom, I think you and I have different parts of the TikTok algorithm going. Whenever I speak to someone about what their TikTok experience is like, it is always very different to mine.
You got to do the dance, the whatever that one is.
I used to get it's got me pegged. It's like, dropping stuff onto a giant axe.
Because I've never seen that
people
once.
Hurting themselves.
No.
Like it's people hurting themselves. Cats.
No.
Like if it's a video with a cat in it, it's got my name on it. Weird science fact. Because I just seem to like.
I get some of those.
People have access to a lab and just do like, hey, have you ever seen this element? It does something fun. But yeah, dropping stuff onto giant axes is really great. And
just imagine the Chinese government being like, we need to form an invasion plan of Australia. And so we've got all this aggregate data. We can see that 39% of people like dropping things on a giant axe. So how can we use that?
Or just more like, okay, so they've got giant axes. We need to accommodate for that in our battle plan.
Giant shields.
Yeah, giant shields. Even bigger axes.
So, because like my corner of TikTok is like, there's a lot of like comedy sketches. There's a lot of like, I don't know, cute cosplay girls. There's...
I was waiting for that.
I don't know. Like, it's just a very different experience to what everyone else seems to be.
About that, George?
Gracie loves the cute cosplay girls. She's a big fan. And we'll say no more about it.
No more. Yeah. On that note.
No, it's just weird. It's just like, it's clearly a very well-designed system. Like, as someone who uses it, I picked it up and like within 10 minutes was completely engrossed because like it tells what you like and the things that you respond to immediately. Like what you swipe, what you watch, what you rewatch, what you like, it all factors in and it gives you this very much crafted experience for you. And like, even if it's a hit rate of like 1 in 5, that's still enough to keep you engrossed in what you're doing. And because it's so fast and like, it's like brain crack, like that's what it is. Like that's how well designed it is. And now Instagram's come up with.
Do if they ban it.
Say again.
Said Elle loves it, so I'm not sure what she's going to do if they ban it.
Well, you can go to Instagram Reels, which is trying real hard to be exactly like TikTok. Thanks, Instagram. Right on time.
Instagram took the whole stories thing from Snapchat.
Honestly, like, is there a bigger piece of shit than Mark Zuckerberg? I know we're streaming this on Facebook right now, but like, honestly, he just feels...
He just like pulls the plug on them. It's like, but sir, we've got more important. Pull it!
But Zuck, I said pull it!
They've only had 5 views, Zuck.
Oh, what a piece of shit. So TikTok might get banned here in Australia as well. So hope you build up your IG follow account and Twitter because, who knows if it's going to be around much longer. We'll see. On that note, we have been, we will be, and we always are Unnatural Selection. Make sure you visit us at our salubrious home on the web, unnaturalshow.com, the only place that doesn't collect your data and sell it for nefarious purposes. Make sure you follow us on all the horseshit social medias that have, do, or ever will exist at Unnatural Show. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok while it's still available. Make sure you follow me on social media on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at George Tsipos.
You can follow me on Twitter at Tom D. Heath.
And you can follow me on Instagram at AC Doreen.
And never forget, you can follow us all down to the White House where you can call Trump a shallow venal piece of shit all day long.
they'll follow us to the White House.
I don't really know how it works.
Calling, or is it we're just going to facilitate the calling?
We'll do a live stream to the White. You can only there's like 10 layers of walls between the street and the White House now, so it's not really a thing where you can sort of go there anymore. But yeah, that'll be fun. Thanks for listening, guys. Love your faces. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Or they will see us, more specifically.
Yeah. No, we can't see them.
No.